Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about crafting the personal statement. And my name is Naama Avshalom, and I'm a graduate fellow advisor and a PhD candidate in the Graduate School of Education. And I'm joined here with Tyler and Ellen. Do you guys want to do some introductions of your own?
Hi, I'm Tyler. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm a PhD candidate in the Planning and Public Policy program.
So just as a quick note before we get started, we've been asked by the School of Graduate Studies to keep track of, who comes and how things go. So it would really help us out if you could do a survey. We'll post it again at the end, but we figured we'd let you know in advance. But just at the end, at some point, if you have a few minutes, if you could do a survey about this, that'd be fantastic. And we're gonna get started. So just as a general outline of what we're going to be doing today, we're going to do a quick overview of general application components and why it's useful to apply. We'll do an intro to the personal statement, all sorts of important things to think about. Then we'll get into more of the details of crafting a personal statement. And then we'll start, giving it a try, looking at some personal statements ourselves and getting a better sense of how to put all these things together. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. Also, if you have any questions at any point throughout, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll either get to them as you drop them in the chat, or we will get to them in the Q&A. So looking at a general overview. So typically, when you apply, there are going to be a few different application components. There's often going to be a research statement. So what is your research? What are you doing? There's a personal statement, which we're going to talk about a lot today. And also there are other supporting materials like transcripts. You might have a CV. You might have letters of recommendation. Depending on what you're applying for, there might be a budget, and sometimes there's some smaller questions for you to answer. So you can think about the personal statement as one of many supporting documents that make the case for why you should be receiving this award. So everything should kind of go together. So when you're thinking about applying, so sometimes these things can feel daunting. What's the point of even applying? There's just so much to think about. So there are actually a lot of benefits. So first of all, it helps you do things like gain practice communicating your work and its significance to a wider audience. So often the people who will be reading your applications are not specialists in your field. There's going to be a variety of different people who will be reading it depending on what you're applying for, so you get some experience applying. You also get a lot of experience just crafting application essays, which is going to be, I think, very useful in general. Also, it's useful for you often to clarify and articulate your own understanding of your research, your own goals, and your academic identity. So often students will come with this vision that like, oh, I need to make this clear for the people that I'm writing for, or for, because of this application, and in the process discover that, oh, wow, this actually made things clearer for me. And also the reality is, as you get more money, it becomes easier to get more money in the future. So basically, as you apply, as you receive awards, you establish a track record of securing external funding and awards, which helps you stand out to future employers and to future funders. And the reality is, ultimately, we are students. We need to fund our lives and our research. So this really helps you gain crucial support for your graduate study and bolster your own research. So I think Tyler is going to discuss some of the personal statement.
Yeah, thanks, Naama. All right, so the personal statement, right? Before we get into specifics about how to craft this document, I just want to talk about more broadly some kind of common scenarios that we find across applications when they ask for something like a personal statement, right? And so now I talked about typical application components. We're all very familiar with the research statement. We had to write something like that, most likely, at least some kind of research interest to get into most of our graduate programs. And you're trained to do that through, right? So whether that's a research paper, whether that's a proposal for your dissertation, we're quite familiar with this genre of writing. And as academics, it's what we're trained to do, more or less. The personal statement can be quite different and overwhelming for students, as it really requires you to blend both, your discussion of your research and your academic training with your own personal experiences, right? And so we typically find in applications, there are these two often common scenarios, right? So one could be where the personal statement is split up into a personal statement and statement of previous research. Sometimes the statement of previous research can be baked into the research proposal itself. Or these can be blended and actually put together into one document that would still be referred to as a personal statement. And today, the actual application we'll be looking at does precisely this. It asks for a personal statement, a statement of previous research, and actually you to discuss your future goals, which most personal statements do, all in one document. So it's a tricky kind of document to organize then when you're required to do all these kinds of things. You have a personal tone, you have a professional tone, and you got to find a balance between these two, right? So we're going to strategize today with you how to do this strategically to really make your proposal stand out, your application stand out. All right. So there's also a lot of variability across this, right? So some applications may not actually require a personal statement at all, right? Or if they do require anything that's personalized, it comes in the form of in the application kind of portal or through your CV, these other documents that are tangential, but also supportive of the application, as Nama was talking about. And just as I said, it may be requested elsewhere. So just because, when you go to an application, an award application, and you look at what's required, it may not list personal statement, but that doesn't mean that in the actual application, when you log in and stuff, that there's not going to be some kind of personal information required. So make sure, you do your due diligence before the night before the application deadline, that, you're aware of, any personal statement that might come within the application portal that might not be listed on the public facing website. All right, so just to start, posing some questions and brainstorming before you actually start writing this document, right? And these are some questions that we find useful, both organizationally, but as a way to really pick the experiences and relevant kind of background things to stand out in your application to kind of highlight. All right, so what's special, unique, distinctive, or impressive about your life story, right? Are there particular obstacles that you had to overcome to get to where you are now, right? Are you a first generation graduate student in your family, or first generation student more broadly, right? Are there specific kind of economic hardships, or is there anything that, that you would want a reviewer to know that would perhaps, add to some of your credibility or merit around things in your life that would be relevant to your professional scholarly goals, right? And that's the kind of key there, right? Is that there needs to be a clear link for them. It shouldn't just be like, something kind of that's not clearly linked. And we can get into that in a bit. We'll get a bit into that a bit more in terms of like what is relevant, what's not. What details of your life might help the reviewers better understand your motives or motivations and set you apart from other applicants, right? So again, building off of the first question, how can you personalize the application but in a very professionalized way, to really allow the reviewer to see the human behind the research, right? What is it that drives you? Where did these passions for your research come from, right? That's a set of experiences that might be, unique to yourself. And then how did you become interested in the field, and what have you learned about it and yourself that has convinced you that you're well suited to the field, right? And this can have to do with your goals to professional, perhaps that's industry or the academy. But really, like, what was your introduction to the field, right? Was there a particular research experience that was illuminating for you, perhaps a mentor? And then how have you really built upon these experiences to situate yourself as being a junior scholar, right? That has aspirations to do either further work in the academy or translate this knowledge to industry, right? So thinking about kind of future goals. And so building off of that, more concretely, right? So these types of questions you should be like thinking about and maybe making notes about before you start writing. So how did you learn about your field? Was that through classes, relevant coursework, right? Professors, etc. And how have you capitalized on these opportunities that have become available to you, right? So it's one thing your professor asks you to be in a laboratory with them or serve as a research assistant, but what initiative have you taken from that experience to further kind of develop your research or the opportunities available to you, right? So you really want to put yourself in the driver's seat as opposed to being a passive kind of recipient of your research program or agenda. You really want to show reviewers that you're taking initiative, that you're seeking out these experiences, and that you have a vision for your path forward, right? And so what reasons can you give for reviewers to be interested in your application? So whether that, as we talked about, those might be some unique or distinctive things about your life. It might be a set of really inspiring or impressive professional kind of experiences as well, right? That may set you apart from other applicants in terms of where you are in relationship to most people in your field at your stage of study, right? And then what impact have you had on your academic, local, or broader community? And we'll spend a lot of time today focusing on this last point to really think about how to translate both the stakes of your research more broadly to the community beyond the academy, right? But also you as a researcher and your values and how that brings how you bring those values into your research, right? And extend them beyond your research. All right, so getting into some more specifics. So you've kind of posed these questions, you've made a list, right? Dotted some kind of ideas down about how you want to approach these questions when you're crafting the text. And now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of like, what actually does that look like, right? How should we organize this? What should we kind of discuss, etc. All right, so before we kind of get into that, let's talk about some general tips, right? And how to think about this document. What's different about the personal statement from a research statement, right? And so the main thing, that is very different is that we're telling a story not about our research, right? But about ourselves in relationship to our research. And this is very challenging, as I said, for graduate students quite often, because we've been really, while we might in our disciplines be able to use the I phrase now, it's still very much, I am arguing, etc., right? It's not that from that space of not necessarily vulnerability, but it does take a certain amount of vulnerability to discuss our life experiences or where our passions for our research comes from, right? And so you really want to think carefully about how you're presenting that story to reviewers. And one way to really do this is to craft a narrative arc that links your essays together, right? So there should be a clear picture for the reviewers across the application and across the documents, right? So think about the personal statement, especially when it's doing, as we'll look at today, this relevant background piece. You know, the research statement really gives the reviewers a sense of what your argument is, you know, your relationship to the field and the project's relationship to the field. But the personal statement really tries to fill in that background information to understand where that research project comes from, right? And your standing in relationship to that project. So really thinking carefully about how to organize this information in a way that builds a kind of arc that then when we get to the end of the personal statement, it really makes sense that you're well situated to do this research. Another really important tip, which, you know, we really hark on a lot here at GradFund, is to demonstrate a commitment and fit to the goals and mission of the funder, right? So if you're writing for, let's say, the Ford Foundation's doctoral fellowship, which you know, has a mission to diversify the academy, you really need to show that you are committed to that principle, right? That goal. And I'll leave it there. We can always talk about that further in the Q&A or during the breakouts, because NSF also has similar kind of missions and goals. So also demonstrate your preparation, right? So are there particular courses that you've taken? Maybe that's a course in statistics or a particular kind of computational interface that allows you to do this research, right? That you have a certain training. Are there, you know, archives that you've consulted? Have you gone to conferences and test driven this research? All these things help to establish your merit as a researcher and that you have a feasible kind of doable project for reviewers, right? And then you need to make sure that you convey how this project and this funding will help facilitate your future goals, right? Where does it fit within your academic journey or your professional journey? Some key distinctions to be mindful of as you kind of craft these materials. So you'll want to place focus on you as a researcher and junior scholar, right? And I think this is another big challenge for graduate students that we find is, and for me personally, has been navigating this juncture we go through where, you know, we've been students our entire, you know, academic careers, and then suddenly we're expected to like transition into scholars quite seamlessly, right? And be experts. And so as you're still at the graduate level, you know, you have to strike a balance between these two kind of hats. And you really want to, as I talked about, avoid the passive voice and, you know, talking about, and this is to the third point, you know, just listing out your experiences, but really trying to put yourself in the driver's seat as kind of curating your own scholarly biography, right? So how do you want reviewers to view you as a professional junior scholar, right? And how can you demonstrate to them that you are well equipped to become a scholar in your field, right? Or perhaps if you have other goals, you know, how are you going to translate that academic research out into the community? And so just on that second point too, right, is that, you know, depending on where you are in your graduate program, there is a big difference between an admission essay, right, or a statement of research interest versus a research proposal, right? They're doing different things, and there's going to be different expectations in terms of, you know, so now, right, so this is another thing that we struggle with. Let's say you're in your second or third year of the PhD, you've had now 2 years of coursework, maybe you've gone through comprehensive exams, you're in a much different place than you were 2 years ago. So those research documents should look different than they did 2 years ago. And they need to, and you need to convey that in your personal statement as well, right? So why has Rutgers been really fundamental or instrumental in your training, and how does it fit into your future goals, all these types of things, right? So they shouldn't be as speculative as they were in the beginning, before you're admitted. All right, so style and organization. As I said, use active voice to emphasize your experience, strengths, and initiative. You'll also want to avoid overly lengthy paragraphs and be intentional about your use of topic sentences. And you'll notice this in the breakout exercise, the second one we do today. I really want you to pay attention. It's a 3-page single-spaced document. We don't expect you to read comprehensively, like line per line, right? But take a look at the topic sentences, right? By reading a topic sentence, you automatically already are aware of what's going to come in the entire paragraph, right? And so a really good proposal, and one that's going to make reviewers happy to read, is one where they can gloss the first topic sentence and get a sense of what's to come, and maybe they don't even read the rest of it, right? At least for the first round. That's often kind of common, right? They'll gloss quite quickly and then go back and look for information that they'll need to write the review comments. So making sure that you really don't overwhelm the reviewer with overly large paragraphs or super condensed text sizes, etc. Really being strategic in the way in which you convey information. So again, some common questions to address that are more specific as you write, right? So you'll really want to talk about what challenges you've overcome, how did you become interested in your research topic, why did you choose Rutgers, right? Why has Rutgers been important to your intellectual journey? If that's, you know, your supervisor, if that's the lab you work in, if that's a consortium of institutions like that you're a part of at Rutgers that have been really instrumental for you, then the reviewers need to know about this, right? What methodological training, I've mentioned most of this stuff, or experience do you have? What are the broader impacts of your work, right? And we're going to talk about this term, broader impacts. And what are your post-PhD plans? So all of these questions need to be addressed in the personal statement. All right, and so one area of the personal statement that's really important, and that often, again, students struggle to start with, right? Because it is that, you know, first handshake or hello to the reviewer on a personal level, is the actual introduction of the personal statement, right? And we tend to see a really big regression here in life stage. So often people will go back to their childhood, right, to explain where this passion comes from. You know, that might have been like a particular experience with some kind of object or lesson that they learned as a child. And so while a short vignette, right, so like an opening story, can be effective sometimes, you'll want to keep it relevant and brief. And there are some risks with going too far back, right? You risk infantilizing yourself and not, you know, positioning yourself and opening with yourself as a junior scholar, right? So you can do it, but it is hard to, you know, go way back to childhood or even high school sometimes, right? Remember that you're in the position now that you're in, which is as a professionalized graduate student. You'll want to keep in mind your narrative arc and overall theme, right, across the application. So the personal statement, you know, really needs to include experiences that support the research statement, right? So you shouldn't be discussing professional experiences that don't really have anything to do with it. You need to really curate and pick your personal kind of professional experiences that support it. You also need to show fit and funder with the funder mission and goals. These are all things to do in your introductory paragraph, right? And establish your graduate study and longer term goals as the point of focus. So really like having a really tight introduction that where you have that, you know, paragraph for reviewers that they can read quite quickly and get a a picture of you, and you can expand then in the rest of the document on just like an academic essay, right? The rest of what you've introduced. All right, I think Nama's going to take us through some review criteria and then the breakouts.
So as Tyler was saying, aligning what you're writing, aligning your personal statement with the review criteria is really central. But how do we put this into practice? And in particular, this kind of goes with what Tyler was just talking about thinking about your narrative arc and your overall theme, which, you know, you've done at this point probably many things. Which of them do you want to highlight? What do you want to focus on in your personal statement, and how is it going to tie into what you focus on in your research statement or your other supporting documents? So right now we're going to be talking about the review criteria, and we're in particular going to focus on one funder, but with review criteria that are relevant and applicable to other funders that you're taking on. So the first thing you need to do when you're thinking about your narrative arc and what to write in your statement is to get to know your funder. So you want to know, what are your funder's mission and goals? What do they want? Because, you know, you can write an amazing personal statement, you can write an amazing application in general, and if it doesn't fit the funder, then it's not going to work. You also, if you can get profiles of past award recipients, then that can be really helpful. So who are they? It doesn't mean that you need to be just like them, but it'll give you a sense of what kind of range the funder has looked at or has been interested in the past. And in general, like what's like the scope of award winners. It's also really helpful to get to know the review process and get to know who the reviewers are. So you often can't know, say, who the reviewer specifically is this year, but as you get to know the funder, and you can also come to GradFund, we can help you with that, you can get a better sense of, roughly speaking, who are the reviewers? Are they people who are, say, academics in your field? Are they people who are, you know, lay people who maybe have bachelor's degrees but definitely don't know your field and don't have the expertise that you have? There's quite a big range, and you can get some of that from learning about the award, and often in some awards will publish lists of past reviewers. So they won't publish reviewers this year, but they'll publish reviewers from past years. So you'll get a sense of what kinds of people have reviewed this. And that'll also give you a sense of how you need to explain yourself as a scholar. Do you need to explain yourself as a scholar who, you know, situate yourself specifically within your subfield? Do you want to situate yourself as a scholar more generally? So that can help guide you. And also, often there's contact information for a program officer. Program officer is a person who's really there to help you with a lot of the technical things, like, you know, what specifically should I write about, or, you know, am I eligible for this award? Should I put myself under this category or that category? Where can I find information about, say, the formatting? They're really helpful with that. They're not the people who are reviewing your award. They're just people who know tons of stuff about the award and can help you kind of navigate the process of applying. So always good to have the contact information for the program officer. So today we're specifically going to focus on the review criteria for the NSF GRFP award. So this is an early career award. So this is an award that people will apply for typically in their first or second year of graduate study. And this is also for typically people who are doing either STEM research or research that's like peripherally related to STEM in some way. So we are looking at these criteria, but this is relevant for you even if you, say, are not in this stage of your life or of your research, and also if you're not in STEM, because these criteria are quite similar to criteria in a lot of different awards. So you might have some more specific criteria in some other area, or some things might not exactly align, but it's useful to kind of go over this award as kind of like a guiding area. So in this particular case, we pulled out 5 of the review elements, and this is we're gonna look at how they apply to 2 different criteria in a minute. So these review elements are: what's the potential for the proposed activity or research to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across different fields. So this is like this intellectual merit thing, and we're gonna talk more about that in a minute. And benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes, which is this broader impact area, which we will like go into a lot more detail in a minute. And we'll talk in more detail about these 5 review elements in a minute. So just as a starting point, we're going to have a group discussion. So in this discussion, so first of all, we're going to put you into breakout rooms. And first of all, introduce yourselves. What degree are you in? Where are you at in terms of your stage of study? And then try to talk about, so I know that this is pretty early on, but what do you think the differences might be based on what you've seen already between intellectual merit and broader impacts? And what are kind of examples of intellectual merit and broader impacts that you could include in your scholarly biography? So try to talk about that with your smaller groups. We're going to open the breakout rooms in a moment, and we'll talk for probably 5 to 10 minutes. Welcome back. So what did you all talk about? What did you come up with your groups? Actually, what you were saying aligns really well with what these ideas are of intellectual merit and broader impact. So intellectual merit is the evidence of your potential to advance knowledge, such as your ability to like plan and conduct your research, work both independently and as a member of a team, interpret research, communicate research, like take initiative, solve problems, persist in all sorts of situations. And this can be demonstrated in a bunch of different ways. So things like your grades, awards you've received, any publications you've done, any presentations you've done, but also in certain kinds of experiences. So in terms of thinking about, which of your experiences do you highlight in your personal statement? Think about which of these aspects of intellectual merit you maybe want to particularly highlight. So maybe you solved a problem in a research project that you did previously in a really interesting way. Then you can talk about that experience. Or maybe you had some really interesting experience in which you worked very effectively as a member of a team, and your team persisted through some complicated situation. So then you want to maybe highlight that story. So just as a note, in, for example, the NSFGRFP, they're interested in both your intellectual merit and your research's intellectual merit. And you should also think about that as something that a lot of different awards will want. So in your research statement, you should talk about things like, how does my work advance my field? How does my project advance my field? But in this statement, this goes back to what Tyler was saying about kind of being a little bit more in some sense, like a little bit more vulnerable. You have to talk about how you are going to advance your field, and basically what potential you have to be an amazing scholar in the future and to kind of bring things forward in your field. So that's the idea of intellectual merit. Now, when we think about broader impacts, we should think about the potential to benefit society more broadly, and to contribute to the achievement of societal outcomes. And in the case of the GRFP, these are like particular desired societal outcomes, but also this kind of is where you go back to your funder and think about what are your funder's goals. So the NSF might have some particular goals, but maybe you're going to apply for something else that has different goals in terms of what broader impacts they're interested in. So, you know, there are awards that are oriented towards, say, promoting or advancing, say, women in the academy. And so you should talk about broader impacts that align with that. There are ones that talk about advancing, say, public awareness of science, then you should talk about that. So in any case, the kinds of broader impacts that you want to emphasize are going to be related to your own interests and your own passions, but also to the award that you're applying for. So in terms of, so this one is primarily talking about broader impacts that are related to your research, but you should also think about the potential that you have as an individual to talk about broader impacts yourself. So things like, do you have any outreach that you're going to be doing with the community? Are you going to be translating your work in some way to make it more accessible to people? Do you have plans to do any kinds of mentorship that's going to help other students advance in their careers? So there are a lot of different broader impacts. There are more localized broader impacts, so things like within your university or within your local community. There are wider, broader impacts, for example, doing things like policy work or policy development, or working with different groups. So there's quite a big range of what kinds of broader impacts you can talk about. And again, that depends on your interests and the award. So now we're going to go back to our small groups in a minute. Oh, sorry, I'm going to backtrack for a second and talk a little bit more about broader impacts for a second. I forgot about this slide. And then we're going to go back to our small group. So in terms of different kinds of broader impacts that we'll be talking about, these can be things like increasing participation of underrepresented groups. So as I was saying, for example, there's the PEO scholarship that's interested in increasing the participation of women. There's the Ford Foundation, which is winding down this year, but they're interested in increasing participation of particular groups that they outline. There are different kinds of outreach you can do. So like mentoring, you can improve STEM education in schools. We had a student last year who was really interested in improving STEM education within the religious community that she grew up in. And so that, like, she has a personal connection with that. And also it aligns with the award that she was applying for because it had to do with also STEM. Increasing public scientific literacy and public engagement. In this case, we're talking about STEM because we brought up the NSF, but it can be all sorts of different areas depending on what area you do research in. There are areas like community outreach, so you can participate in or guide a science club. You can do radio or TV, blogs, or podcasts, things like that. But also things like potential to impact a diverse and globally competitive workforce, and things like increasing collaborations between the academy and industry and other areas. So again, very, very broad in terms of what counts as broader impacts. Because we're talking about the NSF-GRFP, and because we're going to be focusing on an example from the NSF-GRFP, I'm going to talk about NSF-GRFP specific advice. But some of this also aligns with other awards. And again, please feel welcome to come to GradFund in the future, and we can help you figure out what's the specific advice for whatever award that you are applying for. But for NSF, you want to think about, so tell your story in a way that demonstrates your potential for success in STEM research. So this goes back to what Tyler was saying. You know, maybe you fell in love with geology when you looked at rocks when you were 4 years old, and that's very cool, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be excellent at doing STEM research as an adult and as a scholar. So think about, how can you kind of frame your story in a way that talks about your scholarly development and passions? And also think about what experiences you've had that contributed to both your motivation to pursue a career in STEM, but also your preparation to pursue a career in STEM. So things like, what prior research experiences have you had, what classes have you taken, all sorts of things like that. And this can include things like, what are your other professional research or industry or other kinds of professional development or experiences that you've had. And also, what are your career aspirations and future goals? So where do you want to go from here in the future? And in this case, these are all going to be in one personal statement. In some awards, some of these will be split up a little bit among different pieces, but that's generally the picture of what to look for. So now we're gonna put this all together and look at a sample application. So in the chat, you have document. So before you go into your breakout rooms, please download it, because for some reason it doesn't get transferred into the chat in the breakout rooms. As Tyler said, it's a few pages, so you don't have to read it, line by line super carefully. Just look generally, especially think about, reviewers often don't have very much time. And so you get a chance to look at this like a reviewer, and, skim and get more details as you go through, and think about, what does the personal statement do successfully? And which of the 5 review elements does it address? And also, are there some elements that perhaps it doesn't quite address? And try to talk about this with your group. And we will open the breakout rooms, and you get about something like 10 minutes, give or take. And if you need anything, then how to highlight, or what areas to make, or what areas to highlight, how to make things particularly clear. How to craft your story. So this is an ongoing process that requires just some editing, some discussion. So please bring up more thoughts if you have them later. But first I'm just gonna bring up some general takeaways and tips. So the personal statement needs to be uniquely aligned to the application. So going right back to the very, very beginning of today's session, we talked about all of the different pieces that you're going to be submitting as part of your application, and they should weave together like different pieces of a story. So the personal statement should speak to the goals of the funder, but also should speak to your project, in which parts of your project you're highlighting, who's going to be looking at this, and should basically be tailored to what the application is and what story you're trying to weave through the different documents. This statement is how you introduce your story, your strengths, and your training. So, often we're not very used to saying that. As Tyler was talking about, we're very used to talking about our projects, and we're very used to hedging everything a lot. Like, oh, I think I can do this, and I can get support in this way. But no, this is how you are. This is a different kind of writing. You're trying to introduce your story. You're trying to highlight how you are capable of doing this and what kind of training you've gotten to make you capable of doing this project or this work. And think about the personal statement, not so much as like a memoir or a life story, but as an intellectual biography. So how did you become the scholar that you are today? And how are you moving towards becoming the amazing scholar that you will be in the future? And I think these are the key pieces that we're talking about today.